So I'm Sanjay Kumar. I'm an Agile trainer and coach. I work primarily with Bridge. I do training on three popular courses. One is Agile Certified Practitioner, which is a classroom training program for PMI ACP. And the other one is the Certified Scrum Developer. The Certified Scrum Developer program is from Scrum Alliance. It's a 3-day program which primarily focuses on XP practices like test-driven development, behavior-driven development, continuous integration, refactoring, emergent design, those kind of things. Basically, the idea of CSD is to ensure a better quality of software, where CSM focuses more on the process framework. CSD from Scrum Alliance focuses on ensuring better quality of the product. The third set of certification courses that I take is Lean Kanban certifications. These certifications are from Lean Kanban University. I have 15 years of software development experience before I took up this profile of Agile trainer and coach. I've worked in different companies, started with my career with TCS, then I went to US and worked for a few companies like Actuate, worked a little bit for Keen, which is now NTT Data, Deutsche Bank, also BCBS, which is Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. I have different Agile certifications, PMI-ACP, CSM, CSD, CSP, Safe Agilist, and more recently, the AKT, which is Accredited Kanban Trainer from Lean Kanban University. So that's about me. I'm gonna give you share a poll with you, a quick question for most of you. So let's move on. Quickly, let me look at the results of the poll. So 95% said they have used Scrum, which is pretty much shows up in most of the surveys. 20% follow extreme programming, and I'm assuming when we are talking about extreme programming, we are talking about the technical practices like test-driven development, behavior-driven development, peer programming, continuous integration. Though it is part of it originated in the extreme programming community, but these days it's very it's an integral part of each and every team. So it's seen as a commonsensical approach these days than a pure XP kind of practice. And it's surprising to see 39% have been following Kanban or they're aware of it, which is a promising trend, because Kanban helps smoothen the flow of your process, and Kanban can help improve your existing process, whether it is Scrum or Waterfall. And this topic about limiting work in progress, it is a key element of Kanban, and we'll see the relationship in due course of time. So let's move on. I think I'll have to close this poll. The agenda of this session is we'll start with why limit work in progress, a very brief introduction to the idea. Then a brief history about how this all, what popularized this practice. The science behind limiting work in progress. Then we'll talk about pull-based Kanban system. And then we'll discuss how different Agile practices limit work in progress. And towards the end, we'll just do a quick introduction of the Kanban method, which is a way of doing software development using the Kanban practices and principles. Then we'll open the question and answer. Please feel free to pose your questions during the session. I'll keep at least 10 minutes towards the end to take up all your questions. All right, let's move on. So I'll take an example of Imperial Palace Gardens, and this example has been mentioned by David Anderson, who is the pioneer of Kanban method for software development. So this Imperial Palace Gardens, these are in Japan, and the pink color flowers that you see, these are cherry blossoms. They usually, come up during springtime after the winter is over. These cherry trees, these flowers come on the trees. This is usually around April, and some of you who are in US, you might have heard about this in Washington, DC also. They also have cherry blossoms in April time. And so the interesting thing about this, how it relates to limiting work in progress is, if you go to these gardens, I think there is no entry fee. But when you enter towards the entry gate, you are handed a plastic card which says a visiting admission ticket. There's no charge for it. You just take the plastic card, and it is not like a usual paper kind of ticket that you see in movie halls and other places where, at the gate somebody will take it and tear it off and give the half or full back to you. It's a plastic card. So you have to keep it with you, and you stay in the garden for as long as you want. And while you are exiting this Imperial Palace Gardens, at the exit there would be a queue. People are standing there in the queue for the exit, and while exiting, they have to return these plastic cards. So as a foreigner who may not understand Japanese, it's difficult for you to understand, or have a meaningful conversation with these guys about what these cards are used for. But the idea about these cards is it's a way of limiting the work in progress. So if you see this garden as a system, then the people, the visitor who are coming to this garden, you can treat them as a work in progress. Now it's a unique and a very innovative way to ensure there is not more than a certain number of people in the garden, because if you push too many people inside the garden, it creates a little bit of chaos, and it gives the trash might pile up in the trash bins, and the workers who are working over there, it may not give them enough slack or time to maintain the garden in a proper shape, proper manner. An example would be, it reminds me of in Delhi, every November you have this trade fair, and if you go there for those 14 days, there's so much of rush. I wish there was a similar kind of system over there. But in this, so back to Imperial Palace Gardens, what they do is, if they feel that for the entire gardens area, we should not have, let's say, more than 5,000 visitors at any given time. And given the fact that during cherry blossoms, people, especially during weekends, a lot of people visit the gardens, they have to ensure, the management for these gardens, they have to ensure they are not more than a certain number of people, let's say about 5,000. So what they do is they have these 5,000 plastic cards, admission tickets. They hand it over to these guys who are entering into the system, the garden. And once their tickets are, all the tickets, 5,000 plastic cards are gone, they do not allow people to enter inside these gardens. This is just to make sure the garden is not overloaded. And when people start coming out from the other end, they start recycling these plastic cards. So as the cards are returned, they are recycled and given to people who are entering through the system. So that's one unique idea of limiting work in progress. This is the plastic card I was talking about. Let's move on to the second example, and this example is also from the book Kanban, Successful Evolutionary Change for Technology Business by David Anderson. It talks about a small team of 3 developers and 3 testers supporting more than 80 applications. It was a support project. It was handling different change requests. The project was being moved from US to Hyderabad, and now after this transition, the issue was not about the quality. The issue was the requests were taking too long to develop. Even though the engineering time for each request was approximately about 11 days, the requests were taking as long as 155 days. That's close to 5 months. Now what happens is, when the delivery is so long, you don't have a predictable delivery pattern. And that results in constantly breaking promises. So what happens is, if I have an urgent request and I want it to be done within a month or 2 months, even though the engineering time is only 11 days, because of the entire slow flow of a request, where each ticket is taking 5 months, the only option I have is to push that urgent ticket in the system as the most high priority work, so people leave their other work and get onto this one, which again creates a disruptive sort of pattern. So these guys, finally, the manager who was given charge of this team, this person tried to incorporate the principles of Kanban, and one of the key elements was limiting work in progress. So after imposing that limiting work in progress, what they did was they did not allow more than 5 items to be picked up Uh, they allowed not more than 5 items to be in the ready queue, and then they also limited the number of items these testers and developers they were working on at any given time to avoid overloading or multitasking. So with these small set of changes, they were able to create extraordinary results, and the result was the cycle time reduced from 155 days to under 30 days. Now this result was achieved with same number of resources. The resources were still only 6, 3 developers and 3 testers, and there was no other change in the engineering process. So they were still using the same technology for development. The technology did not change. The number of resources did not change. The only thing that changed was how you are managing your flow, which is using the idea of limiting work in progress. And that the cycle time of 30 days that was being achieved with more than 95% confidence, meaning more than 95% of the requests they were being completed within 30 days. That's a huge improvement from the previous world where it was taking 155 days, and then that 155 days also was not like one thing, it was an average time. So it could take anywhere from say 100 to more than 155 days. Of course, it resulted in better customer satisfaction and in turn better employee satisfaction, right? You have less amount of work, so you're not doing much multitasking, which means it improves your focus and clarity. And by focusing on few items at hand, you're also delivering values. It's not that your productivity has gone down, right? So overall, it resulted in big changes, and that is one of the great example of how limiting work in progress could help teams improve the quality of flow. So in general, if you summarize the benefits of limiting work in progress, it helps in preventing the overloading of the system, right? And we'll look at some of these benefits in more detail using an example. It reduces cycle time. It almost always reduces cycle time, and we'll see what is the science behind that. It improves focus and quality, and it facilitates better utilization of resources. And we'll revisit these with some examples. So a brief history of limiting work in progress. So it all started in Toyota Production System, and Toyota Production System, it's a key example. I think it started in around 1960s or 70s, and lots of people from the West, from America and Europe, they have gone to study the Toyota Production System to understand how these guys are, doing things so well. And the challenge they were facing, it started with a challenge, and the challenge was in Japan. They do not have as much space as let's say America. In America, there is no lack of space. There's huge space. So car industries, if they they build lots of cars, if they have lots of inventory, they don't have as big a problem as people or manufacturers in Japan. They can keep those cars in big areas, parking spaces. But in Japan, the keeping inventory, huge inventory, is a big problem. So the challenge which Taiichi Ohno had was how to minimize that space, the requirement of inventory, which is finished work or unfinished work, while still delivering to customers on time. And he took an inspiration from how supermarkets they manage their inventory, and he came up with an idea, just-in-time production, where the idea was to do not stock a lot of inventory, but try to reduce cycle time, meaning try to reduce the time it takes to manufacture a car, so that when a customer request comes in, they can create the car in the shortest possible time. And what they created in Toyota, it's popularly known as Kanban system, even though they gave this name of Kanban system after they had already successfully implemented that. And it was an evidence-based approach, and the key element was to limit the work in progress. And that was one thing. The other thing is the pull-based task allocation system. And I'm sure people who have 95% of the audience, as you mentioned, that you have been using Scrum, and quite a few of you are familiar with Kanban also. I'm sure you have heard about this term about pull-based task allocation, where in sprint planning, people assign tasks to themselves. That's one example. So they did a very similar kind of thing in Toyota, where the work was being pulled by the downstream activity rather than being pushed by the upstream. Let's we'll again in about 5 minutes we'll take an example to look at these two concepts in more detail. Let's understand the science behind limiting work in progress. So there's something called Little's law, which says that the cycle time, which is the time it takes for a product to build a product from start to finish, that is equal to the total work that is in progress divided by the total throughput. Throughput is how much finished product you are producing in a given time, let's say a day or a week. And the other thing is about queuing theory. And the queues, when you have, say, a sequential kind of activity where one thing is being done after the other one, and then the third stage, then the fourth stage, in between stages, queues may form, and forming of queues is fine. It's not always evil because it has economic value in the sense that if you have some work to be done by somebody available, that ensures that when the person becomes free, finishes his work, there is enough work waiting for that person. We'll take an example in the next slide, next few slides of that. So let's take an example and let's continue with our example of auto manufacturing, which I've roughly divided into 4 parts. I'm not saying this is how exactly the auto companies they build the cars. It's a very rough representation of how it could be done. So the first step could be, the ready stage is where you have the raw material ready to build a car, and first you create the chassis, and after you do that, you build a body on that. And after building the body of the car, then you work on the interiors, laying out the seats and other stuff. And then the final finishing where you paint the car, you add tires and alloy wheels and all the lights and all other things. And then after everything is done, then the car is ready. So 4 key stages. Now, the process might look logical, but as a manufacturer, if you're setting up a plant and you're thinking about the resources, how many to hire, the challenge you will have is how many resources do we allocate in each activity? How many do we hire for each activity? And the other thing is how much should be the output of each activity? And it has to be, both are somewhat related. Maybe first to figure out how much should be the output of an activity and see how many resources do we need. So if you think of this is an example of a perfectly balanced system where you have, 5 items, raw material enough for 5 items in the ready stage, followed by 5 items, the productivity of each activity is, let's say, 5 per day. So 5 chassis are being built every day, 5, the body creation is again 5. So for 5 cars, you are adding body on the chassis, and then 5 cars, for 5 cars, the interiors are being done, and the finishing is also 5. This is a perfectly balanced system, and it's you will ensure smooth flow that way if you're ensuring each activity is creating 5 cars. So what is the throughput in this case? You are generating, once you have started with creating the workflow has started from the first stage, after 4th stage onwards, every day you will see 5 cars coming out from the last stage. So the throughput is going to be 5 cars per day. If you look at the work in progress, the stickies highlighted in yellow, those are work in progress. So we're just focusing on the work on which the items on which the work is being done. So ready stage is being discarded and the done is discarded, because done means it's already done, no more work is being done on that. So the work in progress is 20. So if you do the calculation from Little's law, the cycle time is going to be work in progress 20 divided by 5, which is 4. And it looks quite logical also, right? Once the stuff moves, let's say on Monday morning you started doing the chassis, and it was done, 5 pieces were done at the end of Monday. Then Tuesday on the same pieces, the body work started on Tuesday morning, and Tuesday evening the body was done on those 5 pieces. Wednesday the interiors were done, and Thursday the finishing was done. So at the end of Thursday, which is the fourth day, you have those 5 pieces ready. So the cycle time for those 5 pieces or each individual pieces is 4 days. Now this is a completely balanced system, same number of items flowing through each stage every day. Let's take a more real world kind of situation where you may have unmatched speed. Even though you're trying to have perfectly balanced speed, it may happen, let's say, the work in the body and interior stage got slowed down a little bit, and the chassis were doing at a slightly higher pace. So what will happen is queues will begin to form. For example, in the body stage, you have 3 blue items, A, B, and C. I'm using the color convention where blue is pending to be done and yellow is in progress. So 3 items waiting to be picked up in the body stage and 2 items waiting to be picked up in interiors. If you look at the item D, chassis, let's say item D gets done first, and if it follows an order of sequence in order of arrival, then the item D, when it moves on to the body stage, it will be picked up after item A, B, and C. So there will be a delay. So item D will have to wait for some time, approximately slightly more than half a day, because if you're finishing 5 items per day, it might take slightly more than half a day to finish, pick up 3 additional items. So D will have to go through a delay or waiting in body stage, and again each item needs to go through a little bit of delay in interiors also. If you follow the Little's law here, total work in progress is 25, the 20 yellow stickies here, and 5 blue ones in these 4 stages. So total is 25, and the cycle time will become 5, which is very similar to what we are thinking based on common sense calculation, that an item has to wait approximately half a day in body stage and approximately half a day in interiors. So roughly about 1 day of waiting time plus 4 days of actual working, that's roughly equal to 5 days. So let me quickly take some questions to make sure you guys are following things fine. So one question was, what is the difference between lead time and cycle time? It's an important question. So if you look at the cycle time is the time an item has been in process, and the lead time is usually from customer's point of view. There are different definitions, but coming back to our slide, so we can say that the 4 stages that we have from chassis to finishing, the time an item spends in these 4 stages is usually considered the cycle time, which is the engineering time, and lead time is from customer's point of view. So starting from when the request was created to when the delivery was done, that is the lead time. And lead time, because it includes stages which is beyond the engineering time, it is always more than the cycle time. Let me see if there's any other important question that needs to be picked up now. Where can we read more about Lean Kanban? So I'm gonna address that towards the end. Okay. All right, so nothing too urgent yet. So I'll move on with the presentation. All right, so this example, yes, we did that. So this was the case where the chassis stage was working at a slightly faster pace compared to body and interior. So the work was piling up in body and interiors. And if this keeps on happening, so the next slide, this is a stage where the demand is high. So if you see in the done stage where you're creating 5 items every day, and let's say there's more demand, so the finished work will go away from the shelf, or in this case, the parking lot faster. And usually what happens when the work is being consumed at a faster pace, there is a demand to generate more work. So typically the way management responds is by pushing in more work from the left-hand side. And when that starts happening, like in this case, if you see in chassis, more work, you see lots of items in blue, which means it is a pending work that needs to be picked up. The same thing in body, because body was working at a slower pace, it has more work which is ready to be picked up. Now, if given the fact that interiors and finishing, they are, let's say, working at higher pace than body, so they will not have much pending work, because as soon as the body stage finishes the work, it is quickly picked up by interiors. So you do not have any pending work in interiors and finishing, but it creates extra capacity here, which is being wasted right now in interiors and finishing, because people do not have enough work. There might be some idle resources, right? So this is a push system where things are being pushed from the left-hand side. Okay. So pushing in more work beyond system capability generally increases the unfinished work, as we can see the the blue items, and it also increases the cycle time, because it's increasing the work in progress, and it's in this case it's also decreasing the throughput. And when that stress kind of situation happens, employees are more stressed out and they're more dissatisfied, because there's a little bit of chaos, feeling of chaos in the system. So these are typically the problems when you try to overload the system, and that's not even though I took an example of manufacturing, it's very commonly seen in software industry also, where because the customer is asking at a faster pace, customer always wants things to be done as fast as possible, and they give the requirement, they want it to be done in a week or less. So what happens is typically the management, the way they respond is they keep pushing more to employees, and more context switching happens, the multitasking happens, the cognitive burnout. It results in little bit of chaos and increase in errors. So the last three things are very important, which affects the morale of the team. The errors go high, the quality goes low, because when errors go high errors coupled with the sense of chaos, it leads to adding patches instead of fixing it in proper quality manner. It adds up to the technical debt, and overall it leads to employee dissatisfaction. The quality is going down, the work is going up, and there's too much of stress in terms of increasing the productivity. So how pull-based Kanban system is one approach, one solution for that. It begins with a trust. It says, respect people's current capabilities. Just because you demand more work, don't start pushing in more work into the flow. So you respect people's current capability. That's number one. And so don't overload the system. So the key shift is, instead of you pushing through the system, you respect people's capability and let them pull work, right? These two key elements, enforcing the WIP limits and self-assignment of work, which is the task. So these two are the key elements of a pull system. And let's take an example. On the previous stage, the same manufacturing example, if you were to build a Kanban system, and this is what Toyota did in their TPS, Toyota Production System, is they implemented these work in progress limits. And they started they shifted the focus from push to pull. In this case, if you see in each stage, say chassis, you see blue stickies, you do not see any blue stickies anymore. You see yellow stickies, which is the work in progress, and the light green one is work they have finished. So once the work is finished on an item, you see two items right now in chassis column where the work is finished. Now you are not pushing that onto the body stage. People who are working the body stage, once they are done with their stuff, then they will pull that work from the previous stage. So this is a key shift, where one stage is not pushing the work to the next stage. Instead, the next stage is pulling the work from the previous stage as the capacity is available. So if you see here in the body stage, more work is not being pulled because the work in progress limit has been reached. The limit in this case is 7. Now this work in progress limit of 7, it is generally not a very strict rule, meaning that, but does not mean that people can just go and break that rule. The idea is to trigger conversations. So in this case, let's say there are, some resources are idle. So they can either help finish the other items quickly, or what they can do is they can pull in more work. But for pulling that more work, they have to break the WIP limit. So they have to engage a team discussion and see if this is a frequent problem. Maybe revising the WIP limit to 8 or 9 could help, right? Uh, or you have to see what is the underlying problem. Like in this case, even though the problem sees that the WIP limit is causing the idle resources because people cannot pull more work, they're free. But if you dig deeper, the issue could be that in the interior stage, which is the next stage, the work has slowed down. The work has slowed down, so they are not being able to pull the finished item from the body stage, right? And for the same reason, in the next stage, finishing also, you have some idle resources. So over here, the interior stage is acting like a bottleneck, and the previous stage and the next stage, they are sort of, you have idle resources. So the idea is to have a team discussion and see if some resources could be moved from, say, finishing a body and put into interiors. They may not be as efficient, but if they have, if they could help these people in the interior stage to, pick up the speed of the work, and that is a better problem to solve rather than changing the limit and just pulling in, more work. So the key, takeaway from this is enforcing WIP limit and, enforcing the idea of the pull system. When you create a Kanban system, it helps a quick identification of flow-related problems, like in this case. A similar example, if we adapt to say software development example, a very similar example could be like this, where you have 4 stages could be say design, development, QA, and UAT, and a very similar WIP limits. Now WIP limits, there's no magic rule for WIP limit. How much should be the WIP limit? It is something the team has to try with a few things. So in the beginning, each team will go through a cycle of how much should be the ideal WIP limit for each stage. And that also depends on the speed of work and also the number of resources available for a particular stage. But that's a hit and trial kind of thing in the beginning. But the idea is, again, to make sure that people are not overloaded. That's one thing. And the other thing is you have to have that pull-based system in place. So this is the basic idea of how Kanban system works and how limiting the work in progress, it can help improve the flow of the entire process you have, whether it is manufacturing or it is software development or something else. Now, let's take a look and try to see how is limiting work in progress relevant in the Agile world. So even though it might seem like a Kanban concept, but if you look closely, most of the Agile methodologies or frameworks, they make active use of the idea of limiting work in progress. If you look at waterfall project, where the work is started on the entire project, so first you figure out the requirements for the entire project, then you do analysis and design on the entire project, then development, then QA and everything. If you see, the work in progress is 100%. The entire work is in progress. And that's why the cycle time is so high. Either the entire project is done or the entire project is in progress. So that's the one thing which Agile in general try to attack, that problem of too much of cycle time, too much of work in progress. And the different practices, they fall under different categories. The first one is the adaptive planning. The idea of having a release level planning and then a sprint level planning. What you're doing effectively is limiting your work in progress. So in release, let's say you're thinking about, let's say 2 months when of release, which has say 4 or 5 different sprints. And when you start each sprint, the idea is limiting work in progress. And the way it helps is during your sprint, you're focused on just the work that has to be done in that sprint. So what it gives, now most of you are familiar with, Scrum world, terminology and the motivations behind Scrum. It leads to faster feedback cycle because in that sprint, your focus is very small. So you have very clear focus of what has to be done, and then you end up doing that thing. It gives you faster feedback cycle. It gives you some evidence of accomplishment. And also, keeps building the product in different layers. So that's one thing, adaptive planning, where how Agile tries to, use the idea of limiting work in progress. The other is progressive elaboration. So this is more about how to deal with requirements. In case of waterfall, you look at the entire project and try to create huge 100 plus pages of documents about requirements and everything. In Agile, what you do is you just write the requirements, but in very little detail. The elaboration happens more towards as the item moves closer to development. That's when that elaboration happens. If you're following the idea of release planning, then during the release planning or before release planning, you identify the items which need to be developed in this release, and then you discuss them in more detail with the client or customer. Of course, there could be challenges in fixed bid kind of thing where there might be a tendency to elaborate more in detail right in the beginning. But in general, Agile recommends progressive elaboration. So prioritized backlog is important, and appropriately detailed, it means that the items which are more in priority, which will be developed first and which are very close to development, you provide more details compared to ones which are at lower level, lower order of priority. They might be left at the epic level without much details. Imagined design is another idea, which is followed by, so XP lays more focus on that, but even Scrum also maintains that you should focus on imagined design. Where you start with a simple design and then you do continuous refactoring to build layers on top of your simple design. So idea is focus on what is more important right now and then add more layers as time passes by. The other thing is continuous integration, where you are not waiting for the entire code to be built and then integrate towards the end or within a sprint, right? Even if your sprint is 2 week long, you do not need to wait until day 8 or day 9 for integrating the code with the rest of the team. You do that on an ongoing basis. So that way you're limiting the amount of work, because on a particular day you have coded only small piece of functionality. So integration effort is going to be less compared to if you do toward the complete story and then integrate towards the end of the sprint. So these are some of the ideas how Agile makes use of the idea of limiting work in progress. Now, even though Scrum does not specify these things, you can always try to limit the work in progress within the sprint by limiting the number of stories in progress, by limiting the number of tasks in progress by one member. It's again one of the common anti-pattern where people pick up multiple tasks and they're working on multiple tasks across different stories, and they block. They do not say if it's blocked or not. They just are in the habit of starting multiple tasks and finish them on as per their convenience. The other thing is you could also limit the size of a task. By this I mean that limiting the size of a task in number of hours. If a task should be more than a certain number of hours or not. I've seen some Scrum teams which do not have such a limit, and people create tasks which are more than 3 or 4 days long in a 2 week sprint, which is a huge task. We used to follow practice of a task not being more than 6 to 8 hours, so that we are focusing on a small piece of functionality. You do it, you have the code review done and integrate that back to the main code base. So making sure small pieces done to perfection and it works well with the rest of the code. So the Kanban method. So Kanban method, it's an integral part of the limiting work in progress, an integral part of Kanban method. It's a method that helps you manage the flow of work. The focus is on managing the flow of work. It is not a framework like, let's say, Scrum framework. It's a method that focuses on making sure the work is flowing through the system and making sure the delivery is coming out the regular interval. It does not follow the idea of sprints. But so you do not have like 2 week or 3 week kind of sprint, but it does not stop you from having a retrospective every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or let's say a planning meeting at a few stories level, let's say feature level. A feature has multiple stories. You could sit together as a team and do that sprint planning, not sprint planning, but planning for those stories. It's an evolutionary approach to change. It does not say that you start with multiple, you change all the roles, what you have. If you're a project manager, that's fine. It says start where you are. It's an incremental approach to change. So just whatever you're doing, keep doing that way. First, understand how you're working with developing your software. So the first principle of Kanban is visualize your work. So visualize your work, and then you enforce the work in progress limits at different levels, and then you manage flow. These are three common, principles that's mentioned in Kanban method. But this Kanban method, the one I think there was some question also, which was asking about, I think, what courses could be on Kanban method. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So Lean Kanban University, the one I mentioned, they have some courses on Kanban, certification courses on Kanban. So this is their body of knowledge. It talks about evolutionary change, decision-making frameworks, Kanban boards, Kanban systems, different metrics to measure the flow. Because if we cannot measure something, it's difficult to improve. So it helps you measure the flow, and then which in turn helps you manage the flow. It talks about process improvement, coaching tools, and training tools. So these body of knowledge, if you expand that into different areas, so this is the entire, you can see the curriculum of Lean Kanban, different certification courses. Of course, it might be looking too big to be covered in a 2-day class. So they have 3 different certification courses, which is highlighted here. So first one is the TKP, which is the Team Kanban Practitioner. The second is the Kanban Systems Design. And the third one is the Kanban Management Professional, which is the second and third. They are called KMP1 and KMP2. And these are roughly the areas it focuses on. So the people who are new to Kanban, or if they want to improve the quality of their Scrum, TKP is probably a good place to start. Teams that are planning to transition to Kanban for either their support kind of production support kind of project, or even for development, KMP1 is recommended. It's a 2-day class which talks a lot more about Kanban, how you can use Kanban not only for the support project, but also for development projects. That's one. Plus, it's also recommended for Agile coaches. Because as a coach, you need to understand the concepts in much more detail before you coach other teams. And KMP2 is more advanced. It is more recommended for teams which have been following Kanban for say more than 6 months to 1 year, and they want to take their Kanban practices beyond one single team, or maybe towards an organization level. For them, KMP2 is more recommended. Again, for expert coaches, definitely KMP2 is recommended, especially those coaches who are coaching teams on Kanban method for production support or development. I think we have reached close to the end, so let me take up some questions. So do we need to estimate items and story points? Kanban does not talk about, so this focus was more on limiting work in progress. So it's irrelevant from that point of view, but from Kanban point of view, it says start where you are. If you're measuring your features or stories in function points, you continue to do that. If you're doing story point estimation, you can continue to do that. It does not enforce you to pick up a new method of estimating your items. Whatever works for you, you can take that thing. At a proposal stage, when we need to provide cost, we need to provide an estimate. How does Scrum Kanban address this? So it's again more for a project management kind of thing. I'll give a very short answer because it's not related to limiting work in progress. So Scrum says, estimate in stories and do release planning and other things. So let me skip that question to more relevant related to limiting work in progress. Can Kanban be used in real estate projects? Yeah, why not? Any project that requires that has a predictable flow of activities, like in software development, you do analysis, design, development, QA, UAT. It's a predictable flow. You have predictable flow, you can use Kanban. It's more about managing the flow. Do you recommend any training course about Six Sigma Green Belt? So Six Sigma Green Belt, I'm not an expert on that. So I'll have to, I'm sorry, Anshu, I'll have to skip that question. Next. How did you keep a WIP limit at the done stage? So I say, in one example, the manufacturing example, I had put a work in progress limit for done stage. It may not apply for software development, but the idea is if you have a work in progress limit for a done stage, what it's saying indirectly is when you have completed these many items, you have to stop pulling more items. In case of, say, look at the car manufacturing example where we took, if you have a specific inventory, you cannot stock more than 200 cars, and you already built 200 cars, right? And the demand is going down. What should you do? It might be hard, step to stop manufacturing for a while or maybe slow down, but that's probably what you need. There's no point in creating work that is not being consumed. A relevant example in the world of software could be, uh, let's say you might define a work in progress limit for the last item, which was ready to deploy. So as a team, you may have a policy that because Kanban does not follow a sprint or iteration, you may have a policy that once you have accumulated more than, say, around 5 to 7 items in the ready to deploy stage, then you would have a meeting, right? So it might be a trigger for having that necessary meeting to figure out when do we need to deploy into production. So over there, it might make sense to create a work in progress limit for that last done item or ready to deploy kind of item. Is Scrum taking care of work in progress as release planning and sprint planning? Why do we need Kanban in place? If Scrum is taking care, okay, so if Scrum is taking care of WIP limit as release planning and sprint planning, I mentioned that. So we were having a problem when we started following Scrum. The problem we were having is we were picking up stories in our sprint, and let's say we picked up 5 stories. We had a team of about 8 people, around 5 developers and 2 or 3 testers. So we would start working on all the items, and then the items will continue developing items until say day 6 and 7. And suddenly we'll start releasing items to the testers around day 6 and 7, and they will test it, and then they'll identify bugs, and then we'll towards the end of day around day 9 or so, 8 and 9, we'll be fixing bugs and we'll be clarifying questions, clarification with QAs because they understood things differently from us, and all those things will happen. Ultimately, what will happen is we, out of 5 stories, only 2 or 3 will be done. The other 2 or 3 will be almost done, 80%, 90% done, but then they will not be completely done. So our agile coach, who was expert in Kanban, he helped us, so he, invited us to a room and talked about this Kanban principles and everything. And then we started following those ideas that I, showed in how you could implement a work in progress limits at the sprint level. So we started a practice where we are not picking more than three stories at a given time. So even though we have 5 developers, we pick up 3 stories that forced us to collaborate on a single story. So we pick up 3 stories. We could not pick up the 4th one until at least one of the first 3 were done. So that way we are ensuring we're delivering the stories faster to QA. Let's say maybe on day 4th compared to previous day 6 or 7. So that helped us improve the flow. So we started doing finishing more stories because we are the feedback cycle within the sprint, which was feedback from testers, that started happening faster. So you do not need to, in this case, to answer this question, yes, Scrum is taking care of work in progress limits at release and sprint level, but the knowledge of Kanban can help you implement that work in progress limits within the sprint, the area where Scrum does not talk about much. How can we implement Scrum Kanban in fixed weight projects? So fixed weight projects, yes, you'll have to do elaboration in the beginning, elaboration of stories to understand what is the scope and all. But yeah, exactly, fixed weight, it poses some challenge. The customer has to understand the philosophy of Agile, that it is because it is responding to change, and the change is coming from customer. So if the customer is okay with not changing the scope at all, then it's easy, right? But if the customer wants, and most of the customer really want changes to be, incorporated in future, then you have to have understanding with the customer that if they push in more scope, then they have to either pull out a little bit from the scope, or they have to pay extra for that thing. So if you have that understanding, then it can definitely be used for fixed projects, for Scrum, definitely. And with Kanban, as I mentioned, Kanban does not enforce you to use a particular method for estimating your project. You could still use what you used to do in waterfall, say function points. I've seen some Scrum teams that continue to estimate using function points. So it is up to the team what has worked for them or what they feel will work for them in terms of estimating the project. Kanban is primarily more about flow, making sure things are being delivered at a regular pace. So more about predictability of the flow of work. How to handle unpredictable changes in WIP. For example, some of the major issues comes in existing production, which is making the backlog delay as there is not much buffer available to in Scrum. All right. So in case of Scrum, if you have some major issue comes, say production defect comes, so it has to be taken in sprint, right? In case of Kanban, Kanban has a concept of expedite lane, which is a separate lane which does not follow the principles of the work in progress. So the work in progress limits do not apply to that expedite lane. It's a slightly advanced concept. It was difficult to squeeze in here. How to put WIP for user stories in sprint. I think I touched upon that. For limiting the work in progress, so as a team, you have to decide out of 5 or 6 how many stories you pick up, mark in progress. Meaning you will not pick up more stories until one of them is done. So if the WIP limit is 3, you will not pull the 4th one until one of the first 3 is done. In my organization, PMO hesitating to go with Kanban because they think it is tough for them to track the project compared to Scrum. I will disagree with that 100%. Kanban is much easier to track because in case of Scrum, the way you track your velocity, in Kanban, you track it through throughput. And the throughput, you do not need to time box. You can just measure how much of work you're completing every week. And whether you're using function points or you're using story points for estimating your work, you can use either of the approaches. And as the work is getting done, you measure your throughput, how much you're completing each week. And then Kanban has more metrics than Scrum. Kanban has metrics like cumulative flow diagram, flow efficiency, throughput, the lead time distribution chart, and some other things. Again, this is a question by Mahesha. So please feel free to connect with me if you want to discuss this further, or if you want to arrange a short, 1 hour kind of session to, for your PMO, I can definitely come over there, depending on which city you are in. If I happen to come to your city for a training, I can definitely spend time, educating your PMO about Kanban. All right, so please connect with me, Mahesha. Kanban comes under Agile umbrella. Still, why it says Kanban? Alternative way to achieve agility. So by alternative, it says is alternative to if you're using Scrum or XP. That's because even the survey that we took, it showed that 95% of the people, you're using Scrum. So Scrum is it's a synonymous. Scrum has become a synonymous term with Agile. Any company which has to move to Agile, they start following the Scrum, which may not, in some cases, work for you because it becomes a disruptive or big bang kind of change. And if Scrum is not going well, then you can try this alternative path to achieve agility, Kanban, because it's a low risk change. It is not as disruptive. You can continue with your roles. You can pick and choose the things that worked for you in Kanban or even say in Scrum or Waterfall, and then you can slowly transition to Kanban. All right, it's time. I think I've overshot the time by 1 minute. It was really happy to see you, so many guys there and ask so many meaningful questions. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time. I would have liked to answer all these questions. I'll see if you had an important question, if you're implementing Kanban. If you have a question, please feel free to email to me and I'll reply to you. And I'll just show you my email address here again. All right. Thanks again, everyone, for joining in, and we'll sure have more. Based on your question, we'll have more detailed, some more topics on Kanban in near future. Thank you very much for coming. Good night.